Thank you, Mr. Jorgensen.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jorgensen, for taking the time and indulging us for all these questions. I think there's some unique histories in the United States in terms of government's ability to negotiate prices. We don't have to go into that now, but it is a part of it. Certainly, we're seeing PBMs come here and they point the finger in one direction, and the large pharmaceutical companies point their finger in the other direction. I think most Americans hear that as a hustle, as a rigged game, and they're pointing, get it out of here. You look at diabetes diagnoses; they're expected to rise considerably over the coming decades. By 2030, they're saying 55 million Americans will have type 2 diabetes. We could see a nearly 700% rise in the number of young people with type 2 diabetes in the next 40 years. Obviously, this is a miracle drug, and I think by any measure we should recognize that right off the bat. And I think the point that, the lower price, offering a lower price insulin made the access of that specific drug, Levemir, or whichever ones it was, decrease by almost half, or more than half. That should be frightening. And at some point, we might want to figure out how to get the PBM's representatives and the pharmaceutical companies here together and let both sides in an open discussion suggest solutions to this, because it's not sustainable going forward. One point I want to make, we have a company in Colorado called Virta Health that's leading the way to address some of the issues around weight management and long-term solutions to patients with type 2 diabetes. And in a recent study, they provide coaches and help people navigate what they're eating and when they exercise. Virta found that patients with type 2 diabetes who stopped taking a GLP-1 and remained on a nutrition therapy program did not regain weight after a year and had similar blood sugar control as those who were still on the drug. Now, obviously, many patients may have aggressive form of obesity. The appetites that, you can argue that the appetites in people has evolved over the 90% of the time in our evolutionary history. We were hunters and gatherers, so that's a very hard thing for many people to control. But for those patients who can control it, a company like Virta Health can really provide benefits. Are you doing any studies to look at that as a kind of a combined therapy or an alternative therapy that people can move on to that's less expensive?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I think you raise a really good point that also alludes to that patients are different. We probably know of people who live with, say, an aggressive form of obesity, and no matter what they do, they put on weight, and most likely they'll have to be on really efficacious new innovations in the future to manage their weight. But we might also get to know of patient segments where after efficacious treatment and perhaps with a coaching solution, they can change lifestyle to a degree that the coaching motivates them to reinforce that, and they can do without medicine. It's still a bit early days, and I think we have to acknowledge that for long we have looked at people with obesity and to some degree type 2 diabetes as a self-inflicted condition. Right. So I think we should be careful about saying that, if you just get a coach and get this digital support, you're taken care of, because then I think we're letting patients down in need of significant help. But I believe that there'll be a market for such a solution, and it can coexist with our products, and it can also help take the burden off the healthcare system over time. So we don't want to move people on medicines and keep them medicines they do not need. But I also note that many Americans will need to have help, of course, for a long time.
And I raised the question. I was specifically trying to make sure that there are different groups of people, and obviously the notion that everyone can control their appetites is ridiculous. And I think we have disadvantaged people that have differing genetic makeup and physiological character. We put them in unfair positions. Let me go off on a different direction and talk a little bit about sugar and diabetes and then some of the other issues that can arise. Roughly almost 3/4 of our food supply in the United States now is made of what we call ultra-processed foods. Researchers have started studying the possible connection between these ultra-processed foods with higher rates of diabetes and then also dementia later in life. And certainly researchers are still working to understand the exact connection here. So I'm not saying this is thought or has been consequentially defined. But there is evidence that diabetes can lead to higher rate of inflammation as well as damaged blood vessels, which could impact cognitive functioning as we age. Can you speak on research that Novo Nordisk has done on testing the effectiveness of GLP-1s or GLP-like pharmaceuticals in reducing the risk of dementia? Is the company, have you guys got research on this connection, that would be optimistic?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. You raise a really, really good point. And our GLP-1 medicine, semaglutide, works in an anti-inflammatory way, which has tremendous benefits for patients. It not only lowers weight, but it also reduces risk of cardiovascular disease because of this anti-inflammatory properties. And we're now also testing it out in Alzheimer's disease, where we hope we can show in data end of next year that being on this medicine can bring benefit for people with Alzheimer's disease. So this whole cardiometabolic disease state that is leading to a number of comorbidities is actually also a leading cause of a number of cancers. We aspire to show in continued massive investments in R&D that we can document these benefits and have them FDA approved.
Great, thank you. And I'll just end with in terms of the whole tenor of the discussion, that Henry Ford was famous for coming in and actually dramatically reducing his prices so as to dramatically increase volume, and dramatically succeeded at a level that nobody really imagined. And I think with a miracle drug like this, you might have that same potential where actually lowering the price could dramatically change not only the success of the pharmaceutical, but also the success of the business.
Senator